Greetings, fellow travelers, and welcome to The Way of the Showman, where we view the world through the lens of showmanship. I am your gracious host, Captain Frodo, and what a pleasure it is to have you back here with me. Well, we are yet again recording this on the road. I am on the way. I am in the caravan again. I'll put some pictures up on my website on thewayoftheshowman.com of this, and maybe I'll put up some pictures on Facebook. I am in a tiny little caravan. This is so cute. I'm doing a gig here in outside of Oslo in a place called Mortensrud. We're squeezed into a tiny patch of grass which seems to have been forgotten by its existence, have been forgotten by the commune and the state. No one has come out to mow this grass since in the dawn of time, or maybe out in the sort of midday on that same day when the world was made. It's a little forest here, but it is squeezed in between a kindergarten, or like a nature kindergarten, and a school. We got 3 or 4 caravans. There's a couple of living vans, and there are 2 big tops. But currently we are still living in a pandemic, of course, so things are very different. The commune, which is the sort of council or whatever, they're set up in between the circus and the world, and they're taking people. Everybody has to write their names on list if you want to come in and see a show, or you want to come in and be in a workshop. There's lots of workshops for children and for young adults. They're coming in to learn some circus things. Then you have to first write your name and your phone number down, so that if anyone gets sick, then they can call and contact everybody who was where for how long. And kids come in, and there's spray bottles of anti-bac that every single person has to be wearing. We're spraying down circus equipment and leaving it for 3 days, and it's divided into piles of going, okay, this is the one we use on Friday, this is the one on there, and it's all a little complicated. But man, the kids here, this is a lot of immigrants, and it's a very particular type of neighborhood, far a little bit outside of it's a good bit out of town, but the children are just so excited. And of course there's some of these that are just coming every day. Yesterday we've done a bunch of workshops, and we were going to put on a big cabaret. Well, that is to say, I think the tent can sit about 200 people, but I think we could only have 50 people in there, so it's not a big cabaret. I mean, the show is big with amazing artists, but the actual size of the crowd is very small. And anyway, but man, they're enthusiastic and are loving it. So one of the kids would go, okay, we're done now. We're finished with the workshop, and and the kid goes, well, what are we doing now then? And we go, well, there's a break now. There's a show in an hour and a half. Well, what are we supposed to do in this hour and a half? So some of these kids have just basically moved in and are going from one thing to the next. But it's a very different environment. I was standing here, and that was on the first day, and there was a little boy that was really, really excited to get to walk on a tightrope. And I kept walking. I walked close to him so he can just sort of touch my arm. It's a low tightrope, and he's walking. And we've done this, and I'm saying, oh, that's great, and put your feet straight, and do this, and look over there. And then while we're walking, he's just letting him do it, and then he just sort of stops in the middle of the tightrope, as one might do. It made me, of course, afterwards think of the story of Nietzsche from Also sprach Zarathustra, of the tight wire walker as a great symbol. Anyway, he stands out there and then just turns to me and says, so are you a Christian? And the question kind of stumped me. In the circles that I normally walk, people don't just ask that. So I go, well, no, I'm not. And he goes, oh, are you a Muslim then? And I go, no, I'm not a Muslim either. What are you? And from someone who's 8 or 9, I'm amazed that he goes, oh, so what are you then, a Buddhist or a Hindu? And I'm amazing that he can reel off the religions just like that, the main religions of the world. I said, no, actually, I don't have a religion. I'm probably closer to an atheist. And he just goes quiet for a little bit and walks a little further on the tightrope, and then he turns to me and has processed it a little bit what this then possibly could mean, and goes, so when you sit down for a meal, you just eat without prayer? And I said, yeah, I do. I'm very grateful for the food that I get, but I don't do any prayer. And then he didn't comment on that anymore, and then just kept going. But I love that in his kingdom, this is what that means. If you don't have religion, it just means you can just eat as soon as it's done. That's amazing. So I talked about the kingdom of childhood last week, and strange enough, it almost took me by surprise that I was back here again, because I am back in the kingdom now. I'm looking in, getting to see. I did morning shows here at 10 o'clock in the morning. 2 school classes came in, same project. They're all sitting there in a meter apart, and each class can actually sit together like a group in the tent. So then there was a little bit more kids allowed. Then I think there were 65 or something in there. But it's a big tent, so it's still quite a bit more than half empty. But anyway, got in there, and the kids were so excited, and I came out and I was going, are you ready for the circus parade? Which is how I start my family show. And the kids were just so excited that I kind of lost in the first show. I cranked them up so much I kind of lost control, which was very exciting to try to rein them in, and they're screaming and stomping their feet. So yes, was almost a rebellion in the kingdom of childhood. But praying. We were doing a workshop yesterday, and then sometimes there's just a whole bunch of kids. All of a sudden, there's like 20 kids there's a separate big top for the workshops, and we're in there. But for some reason, there's just 2, and there's me and Morten, which is another performer, excellent sideshow performer. Morten is he's worked for many years now with Pain Solution, which I talked about a few episodes ago. Talked about Hove Fjell, who's the originator of this incredible group of fakirs and sideshow performers that lives in Norway. And I got to see Hove as well the other day, which was excellent. Great to see people that I've worked with since the middle of the 90s. Anyway, me and Morten are there, and there's only 2 other kids, and I'm showing one of them some devil stick, and Morten is doing something over, and then one of the kids turns to the other and he goes, oh, it's 15 minutes, or whatever, and then they both just drop their stuff and go, okay, we're going to pray now, and then they walked off, and there was 2 godless heathens standing in the big top squeezed into a secret little field in between the school and the kindergarten in the outskirts of Norway. It was a nice moment. So it's been nice to be here. So this time I am recording in the caravan, and it has been amazing to come here and meet some more people. The boss, Sverre Våge, who is the one that puts on this project, it's called the Circus Village, and they go on tour every summer, and it's a very, very cool project. But he said, the other day he was just hearing a strange voice coming out of the tent, and the technician that we have here, Rui, he was listening to the podcast. So listening to the podcast, but through the speaker system of the tent as he was rigging and setting up lights and whatnot. So there I was, yours truly, being blasted out, talking about something or other, Mythopoetic Carnival, or the meaning of life, or showmanship and natural selection, and blah blah blah. And it was being blasted out in a small big top in the middle of Norway, in the middle of nowhere in Norway, and that pleased me greatly to know. It's nice to know that there are people out there who are listening, and that they're listening in their big tops around the world. That was very nice. So, yes, these are strange times. It's weird to be doing a gig where you feel most of the creativity is going into finding out how to teach a workshop and have all the kids keep distance to themselves and keep distance to us, and try to teach devil stick to someone without coming too close. Very strange. But it's also very beautiful to be doing some kind of work and meeting the young. So, with that, I believe we have reached the end of what we need to say here, and it's time to delve back into the two last episodes. This is the second last of the episodes about the Mythopoetic Carnival. So, come with me, join me aboard the showmanship, and let's sail back out onto the sea of ideas. The collective imaginary. As it turns out, the broadest direct support of our mythopoetic project comes from sociology and its concept of the collective imaginary. After I had already started these explorations, I came across this idea of the social or the collective imaginary. Ideas explored and developed in my limited knowledge by Charles Taylor, sociologist, and Gerard Bouchard, a Quebecois thinker and sociologist. At first I thought it was just what we have already looked into, like Jung's collective unconscious. And there is an overlap for sure, but the leap of faith into the almost supernatural realm that's postulated by Jung has been criticized and questioned by many a lot smarter and well-read than myself. So not to jump on that bandwagon, because it hasn't been criticized necessarily for its value, but as an independently existing otherworldly realm. That's harder to really nail down. When I found this sociological expression of this idea, I at once felt like I had found the correct theoretical expression of what our mythopoetic carnival has been. I didn't know about it, and I didn't know it, but we have been unearthing and playing with the collective imaginary here over the last bunch of episodes. In episode 2, Welcome to the New World, we explored different aspects of the imagination and different ways of using the imagination, which of course is an important part of a lot of people's work. Jung also talks about this. What is it he calls it again? I can't remember this. I should have taken notes on that, but active imagination or something like this, where you use it within specific realms and within specific limits to discover real truths. Anyway, here we are, wrapping it all back up again here towards the end, wrapping it up into the very first episodes. It's all a strange loop, like a beautiful M.C. Escher woodcut of some impossible object. And I know that the last half of these episodes in this first season has been perhaps going a little deeper and into more detail than what's tickling some of your exact sweet spots. I've been jumping here and there to frame this idea of a mythological foundation of showmanship. As has been commented, Mr. Raven, there have been a distinct lack of bum jokes in these episodes. It's all very serious and all that, but this is a serious project. a serious project. And there's also been less personal sharing of my struggles and tribulations in the second half of the season, apart from last episode, which was a little bit to rectify for this, but I do not make any apology in this, for such is the way in the undergrounds of showmanship. What I do hope is that you have all been able to keep a hold of the narrative thread that started in episode 9 and which will continue for one more episode after this. Because we set up and explored what the Mythopoetic Carnival is as a concept in episode 9, and then in each episode after that we've looked at it alongside other more well-established theories and practices, some of them a lot more established, like Plato's theory of ideas or forms in episode 10, where we put it up against a very real lack of teeth and falling apart lives and carousels carnival of the real world. And we have also very gainfully looked at it alongside evolution as an organic or cultural process akin to and following the patterns of organisms. And this is one of the most fruitful and interesting avenues in my opinion. And we have also looked at it as depth psychology. And now, after all this in the final analogy, we shall take a quick glance at the concept of the collective imaginary before we just wrap up this in-depth exploration for now and in the next episode. So, as I said, I just recently discovered this thing after I'd started this, and I first heard about the collective imaginary in an interview with a very interesting Swedish economist turned philosopher and thinker called Thomas Björkman, whose book The Nordic Secret is very interesting. I'm reading that at the moment, but it's a little outside the scope of our topic here today, but I'll post some links to him talking about that. So, in this podcast, he mentioned this idea of the social and collective imaginary, and then went on to Scribd, the book app that I subscribe to, and found a copy of one of the authors that he then talks about there, and I'm going to go into that in a minute. But what is this social or collective imaginary? Well, it touches very much on what we've already talked about here over the last episodes. If any of the following sounds like a repetition of what I've talked about, it's a feature of today's episode and not a bug. It is exactly why I'm going over it, to show how well this concept encompasses the explorations we've taken over the last episodes. Every society has shared stories and myths, religious, historic, national, cultural, heroic, and so on. And these values and beliefs hold sway over most of the population. Whether they come from religion, political institutions, or other sources, they enjoy prestigious status and go largely unchallenged. We don't even think about them. These myths have the power to bring societies together as well as pull them apart. They're not, as a whole, neither good nor bad. It's just a sum of everything. To Gerard Bourgeard, which is one of the guys who has written books about this, and his book is called Social Myths and Collective Imaginaries. Yeah, that's right. I'm so halfway through it here, so I just had to look at it. And he says that myths matter because of the energy they unleash, energy that enables a population to mobilize and rally around collective goals. At the same time, myths work to alleviate collective anxiety and to meet the most pressing challenges facing a society. And this is, of course, pretty much exactly what I said from all sorts of sources, or making it up as I went along. So it's interesting just to find it all covered in his book in a very systematic way. And this imaginary is not one thing. It's a vast and rich tapestry, and can and does vary from village to village and nation to nation, from family to social class. And the concept also applies to the lives of organizations like institutions and businesses, sports clubs, and I add, for us who are followers of the way of the showman, it's also, of course, relevant to showmanship. So there you go. He pretty much states it. He didn't quite mention us as a specific example in the book, but it was implied. We're living in a time where identities are questioned and boundaries pushed and explored. There's no doubt that there's a dialectic nature to how individuals and groups within societies shape and reshape themselves. Some are breaking with the most commonly pervasive myths. Instead, they find and redefine themselves. They find other aspects, very often anchored in. They can anchor themselves on events or personas from the past, and through this they redefine themselves in the present, some person or event, a victory or particular defeat even, something which they perceive as important to their own group or community, as examples of pioneers or events that for them has become the source myths of this new story that will serve as a foundation for the forging of new identities and the future path. And this is the constant messy process that's going on of imagination and reimagination, which is part of the idea of the collective imaginary, the slow but constant shaping and reshaping of identities and societal institutions and every other aspect of a society. This is all just the continuing evolution of the social imaginary. It's just a sum of all the things that are around there that shapes the stories that we tell us. Because the social imaginary or the collective imaginary is deeper than something like ideology, according to the theory. Ideologies are argumentative constructs intended to be rational and coherent. They are, according to the theory, using myths. They're using the myths or symbols as authoritative tools. Authoritative, I guess it's actually called. Authoritative tools. So ideologies are more rational constructs. And for the most part, the broader society is unaware of the social imaginaries, which form our society in an unconscious way through what we find important and through the stories that we tell ourselves. Bouchard differentiates myth from ideology specifically by explaining that myths are what he calls it, engines of the ideology, in that the underlying myth is the basis for an ideology's ability to mobilize people. They're connected, but connect us to them in a different way. Where an ideology is connected to reason, myth is connected more to emotion and symbols and are connected to more broadly shared visions like liberty, equality, justice, solidarity, and religious beliefs. So it's all part of the reason why it can be a little tricky to express in brief. It is because it is actually a little bit vague. It is not quite as specific, because by the time it becomes specific, it takes on other things, like we call it something else, like an ideology. And the collective imaginary, the myths, they lie beneath it all. They shape all the stories that are part of our culture and that we tell ourselves, that we see reflected in our films and books, and it is shaping society's productions, artistic and otherwise. It's guiding our institution, the formation of our institutions and our laws in good and bad ways. The way it reaches us, into us, influences the way that we see the world. This mythological underground shapes what stands out for us as important and relevant in the world. The patterns we notice and pay attention to seems relevant to us because they're informed by our collective imaginary and the stories that we tell ourselves. In a bit, I'll look more specific at how painters and poets and filmmakers sort of joined us showfolk in a mythopoetic creation that shaped the collective imaginary perception of circus. But all of this imaginary, it's all a little bit abstract. So let's try and get a bit more concrete before we leave it all behind. So what is a good example of this social imaginary? Well, Thomas Björkman talks about, says money. Money is a good example. Money is something that we all believe in. Whether you want to or not, you could argue that in our modern society you need money to live. We also need oxygen to live. But it doesn't take much thought to see that there is a major difference between these two. Both are necessary, but our dependence on them and their fundamental nature is very different. We can get together, at least in theory, and decide that we're going to stop using money. That could happen at a meeting. We could decide that we're going to use some other idea on how to organize our interactions, but we can't decide that we're collectively going to stop breathing. We need oxygen because that need is connected to biology. Money is a social imaginary, but this is the important bit here, and that is that the social imaginary is socially constructed. And when it's constructed like that, like we talked about, you could have a meeting, it means that it could change. And from my point of view, if we look aside from our straight up just entertaining and being some decoration upon the face of capitalism, creating change, that is our business. We enthrall people with our craft. We get them laughing, we get them thinking, we get them feeling. We move people, quite literally. We, as the ones who faces the other way, we move people. When we take to the stages of the world and as we deliver our material, we see people, I certainly do in my act, I see them literally bend over with laughter. They pull away in disgust when I perform my dislocation, or when somebody hammers a nail up their nose, or they have their mouths drop open when a magician demonstrates something impossible. I just worked with Charlie Caper, an extraordinary Swedish magician, and in the final bit of his excellent cups and balls magic act, he drops a melon out of his hat, and I think I saw mouth drop open there pretty much every night. And in this state of motion that we get our audience into, there's where the internal makes the external move. In this particular state, change is possible. We can't do any shows now, but we can prepare. Do we just want to plod out the same stuff we always did? Are we really completely satisfied with what it was we did? Never again. Never again. I hope we will get a time like this where all we can do is wonder and address what we do unhindered by financial constraints. But in this time we do well to think about these things. We have the time to ponder whether the work we do is really our own, or is it really our own, or is it what we are paid to do? Either way, you might be doing what you love and receiving money, or you realize that you're doing almost what you want, but that there's something more in you. Or you might realize that you're completely on the wrong path. All is equally valid, but this is as good a time as any, or maybe it's actually uniquely suited to this kind of examination of ourselves and the conversation we are having with the world through our work. Because no one has given us a gig where we need to put on, at this time anyway, no one is giving us a gig where we need to put on a yellow curly plastic clown wig, and we have to prostitute ourselves and do something which is just for the money. We can't do it for the money, so we are free to roam further in our imagination and in our thoughts on our own identity and our contribution to the world. We have the capacity to change the patterns that society finds relevant. That's what I'm claiming here. Most of the time we don't do that. Most of the time we don't even think about that. But over the last many episodes we've been talking about these myths, and we've been talking about it, so perhaps all of this has been a little bit too theoretical. But if you take nothing else away from it, just remember this: our foundations as showfolks is deep, and our capacity as agents of change in the world is very real indeed. The stories we tell ourselves today, and that we implicitly or explicitly portray on our stages, are different now than they were 500 years ago. We no longer accept the divine rights of kings, that the purity of their aristocratic blood gives them and their relatives authority to rule and receive taxes. There are many stories we tell ourselves now that might not be told and believed in the future. If we all take a long, hard look at ourselves and our own foundations, we can become voices in the changing mythopoetic landscape, our own and the world's. We have audiences. We have big audiences if we all add them together. Maybe not right now, but we used to. And when we come back out again, part of me thinks that the world is just going to roll back as much as it can to do just exactly the same stuff that we did. But if we come out with a tiny little change in our hearts, slight different skewed view upon reality and what's important in it, and we all introduce a little thing there, who knows? Who knows? Like back to the collective imaginary, that went off on a tangent there. Like how our own deep unconscious forms the way that we act as individuals, the social imaginary forms the way a society acts. But this is not a one-way process. The myths inform society, but myth is also produced by social actors, shaped and picked up and paid attention to by our actors and social actors or performers, showmen, showfolk alike. And it takes time for these myths to go through and to influence society. And this is where I find us as showfolk important players. We have the attention and the interest of the crowds, so the material we share, the stories we tell, it can have an impact. The last 5, this and the next episode, is an attempt at the preliminary carving out of a position for a mythology of showmanship. No myths per se, but a landscape and a collective imaginary space from which to grow them, grow these myths and to find new things to make relevant. And then hence, if we find it relevant, then that becomes part of our material, whether we come up with a good little gem of something. Maybe it's a joke, maybe it's something that jolts people in a way, or maybe it's just a straight up point that we tell towards the end of our show or anywhere. Maybe by becoming aware of ourselves as myth creators, we can break free from some of the bonds that are placed on us as mere entertainers. Because I've said this before, like, we are entertainers, but I do think that the potential goes much bigger than that. But it's been pointed out to me by my friend, the brilliant and smart punk performer Mitch Jones, aka Captain Ruin, who's another captain. I guess we are captains of our own distinct showmanships. And he pointed out that we should be skeptical about the inherent value of entertainment, since it is always in a political relationship with culture. And we talked about this a little bit from his brilliant article last week. And this is a topic that I haven't pondered much, but as we have just begun looking at it, I have, and it's very interesting. For now, I just think that being aware of what we are saying, which parts of the collective imaginary that we're taking for granted in our presentations and shows, knowing that, reevaluating it if we're not happy with it, that is a good step along the way. Because we're living in a time of great upheaval. We're slammed under a pandemic The Black Lives Matter movement is still literally fighting in the streets of America and is coloring the conversation around the world. Identity politics, gender politics, environmentalism, ecology, economic reforms, global warming, it's all out there, like irritants in the oyster shell of reality. Each of these tribes are fighting for their own thing, but only in a way, because there's also something, as far as I can see, which ties it all together. And this is the questioning of society's myths. So each one has their own very specific ways of questioning or rebelling against or whatever, and each one is just as valid, but there's also something that ties it together, even though you might not initially see something really majorly similar about someone who's interested in a different kind of educational system, and then someone who's interested in prison reform or global warming. But as I see it, there is some kind of coherence in these many issues and the many fights of questioning. There's an emerging unity in that we need a new way of thinking. We need to redress our social imaginaries. The problems facing us are not those of individuals or individual nations. That's not to say that there are not nations and most certainly individuals that are suffering, because there are, and unfortunately there probably always will be, but we need to think in a more ecological way. It's all about relations, how everything is completely and fundamentally connected. We need a systems way of thinking. And the problems that face us, like giant mythopoetic, all these problems are forming, in a way, like a giant mythopoetic showman staring back at us, showing us something, and we don't know what, but it's global, and I think we need to reshape what stories we tell ourselves. We need to delve back into the social imaginary and reorder and rethink our collective myths. Hence my passionate rant and month and a half worth of exploration. So if I can do it, if you're interested, and we can do it together, then there is a chance that society at large is willing and interested. We're not that special. I didn't know if anyone would listen to me, but you did. And I know that we have some of the most powerful storytellers and performers in the world with us. Some of them are listening to this right now, and even more in our extended networks. We have audiences that listens to us, not ranting and raving like I am here now, but we can all insert grains of truths, little irritants into our shows that perhaps can grow into pearls in the hearts and minds of our crowds. Anyway, what I'm saying is that this Mythopoetic Carnival project is not just some frivolous thing. I think it's an important part of the work that we must do as performers and showfolk. Our industry is decimated. We're absolutely one of the hardest hit, deemed almost universally as a luxury. I don't know why bars and that are open and people can mingle and drink and hang out and pick up when theatres are not allowed, where you have to sit in a designated seat with. As showfolk, we define ourselves by being at the center of events where humans come together for fun, for education, and for social recharging of our most human faculties. This mythopoetic exploration has been my own, but with you and 1,000 others, it's a quest that we can make us all stand stronger in ourselves and stronger together as a worldwide community. This podcast is downloaded on all 6 continents. For all I know, someone might have downloaded it and listened to it in Antarctica, but my stats don't count for that continent. So if anyone is there and you're listening and you're not been taken hostage by Shoggoths and the Old Ones, then send me a message. I, for one, am finding this interest from all of you into things that go deeper very, very encouraging, because we're going through a major shift in society, even if it all, by some miraculous way, eventually goes back to being just the same all over again. Then this shift and this time here now, it's big, and it can be big. And the deeper the shift in society, the deeper we have to look into ourselves. All right. I was reading a book. This is more specifically about circus. And there was a chapter in that book called The Imaginary Circus. And it turns out that this guy has mapped out the kind of beginning of the way just how the social, the change that has happened in the social imaginary in the way that circus is perceived by the general public. Because from its inception around 1770 or so, and over the next almost 300 years, the circus has gone through a large transformation in the cultural and collective imagination. In the beginning, it carried with it a strong social stigma. It was a largely nomadic tribe of people that roamed the earth, carrying with them strange animals which could do bizarre things, and in their wagons were wild children bereft of any ordinary education. And they were, the kids and adults, they were trained into otherness as much by the unusual skills they would learn as well as from the lack of normal education. They were suspected as being thieving and untrustworthy people. You might not fear them, but whilst taking in their tricks and performances, one would do well in keeping one's hands on pearls and pocket watches, as is depicted on that Hieronymus Bosch's famous painting of a magician performing a version of the cops and balls, while some fellow conspirator steals the money pouch of one of the spectators, which is enthralled by the presentation. Obviously this goes back to from before the birth of circus. But today, when I talk of the mythic underground and the deep resonance of the circus and carnival characters, I'm calling on the images that are relatively recent. As we said, the whole art form of circus is short of 300 years old. Of course, our craft goes back deep into the prehistory, but as an organized outfit of traveling performers with the skills we know as circus and carnival arts, the history is relatively short. But leaving prehistory and solo performers and tiny family troupes performing at medieval marketplaces aside, the development of circus as a mythologized entity has gone through a rather rapid evolution. I think it's a rather rare phenomenon. I mean, what do I know? Not so much, but in my experience it is that a way of life and an expression of skills become mythologized. The change has gone from being sort of nervously viewed as vagrants and at the very least petty criminals, if not outright thieves and charlatans, to something otherworldly and poetic and romantic. The way of life of the circus is absolutely now a poetic thing, and if you wax on about this, like I sometimes do, then people know what you're talking about. The skills of tight wire walking, acrobatics, juggling and magic has become attractive, and in many arenas it's symbolic and resonant. The nomadic life of the circus has become allegorical and interesting. Their play with and defiance of death captivates the hearts and minds, and their mastery of animals of all kinds, at least up until recently, was something intriguing and masterful, and with the dual status of at least the clowns as both fools and saints, you have a rich tapestry of avenues for mythopoetic creation. We've touched on all of these aspects in earlier episodes, but this is all expressed in this book that I was reading by Paul Boursac, and the book is called Circus as Multimodal Discourse, Performance, Meaning and Ritual. And as you can hear, it's an academic text, but so was the book on the social imaginary. And I guess as you have listened to this over these last few months, it might not surprise you that I'm reading academic texts. I sometimes might be a little too interested in the details of this, but anyway, the transformation, though, from a dubious craft and a way of life to this deeply mythologized domain of inspiration filled with archetypal characters, which it is today, has been forged not just by us circus artists, by doing our shows. On the contrary, it could be argued that some of the main influence of the poetry of circus, a sort of, it's not so far off being looked at in that sort of way of that we've spoken about over these last episodes. This world has also, or possibly mainly, been forged by artists outside of the circus, people with even bigger reach than us. It's been the result of the creative elaborations as circus was portrayed by artists in poems, stories and paintings and films. And this guy Paul Boursac puts it in his book like this: there has been a progressive elevation of the circus to the status of transcendental object through the works of poets and painters from Romanticism to Surrealism and beyond, notably in the cinema of Charlie Chaplin and Federico Fellini and Ingmar Bergman, poets, and also painters like Renoir, Toulouse-Lautrec, Picasso and Chagall, has helped develop the impression that the circus has progressively become a fertile and valid artistic theme. And this fertile, there we have it again. And he goes on to say, a powerful discourse, and with discourse he just means that books has been written about it and conversations are had in public forums as well as in academia. So a powerful discourse has thus emerged in European literature, establishing the circus as a unique source of values at the interface of the technique, perceived as an ascetic exercise leading to a profane sainthood, and the sort of metaphysics in which mystification, mystery and mysticism become one and the same thing. So, and he dates this back to kind of the 1830s, 1850, and he goes through a bunch of poems and stuff which are some of the earliest things that he finds, which is really highlights this idea of circus not just as he writes about a poem, or someone who's doing a sort of review in a poem form of a show where something went wrong, and there's a live bear in the show and it comes out and almost kills someone, so in this he performs a sort of mythologizing. And when I read of this mythologizing of the circus, I begin to think of this other craft which we've briefly mentioned that has gone through a deliberate mystification and symbolic world building, and that is the craft of masonry in the Freemasons. This way of life, and this has been made into a symbolism which aims to teach moral and ethical lessons. And the difference here between them and us, as in the Freemasons and the Showfolk, is that most of this symbolism has been created by the Freemasons themselves, and that's had another effect. It also has something to do with their secrets, of course. And I looked at Wikipedia, and this idea seems not completely far-fetched. And there it says, Freemasonry describes itself as a beautiful system of morality veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols. The symbolism is mainly, but not exclusively, drawn from the tools of stonemasons, the square and compass, the level and plumb rule, the trowel, and the rough and smooth ashlars, among others. Moral lessons are attributed to each of these tools, although the assignment is by no means consistent. The meaning of the symbolism is taught and explored through ritual and in lectures and articles by individual masons who offer their personal insights and opinions. So according to that, at least I'm on the right track there, right way. So a certain difference exists, though, because the secrecy of Freemasonry and also of the people of power holding prominent positions within the society has contributed to the fact that the development of their role in the popular imagination or the collective imaginary, is very different from the circus. The negative connotations of a desire for world domination and nefarious plotting, planning, and actions in the world are certainly part of the collective imaginary. The mysterious order of Freemasons has been blamed for a whole bunch of world events, from the French Revolution and World War I, the hiring of Lee Harvey Oswald to shoot JFK, and even to the sinking of the Titanic. So I guess in these two aspects we see a stark difference in how organizations can see themselves as a bastion of morality and charity through its collective imaginary, its own collective imaginary, and also how the general public can see them as a dark and clandestine force through their collective imaginary. And circus might just have been lucky through the help it's had from fellow artists, because the imaginary circus is in general perceived as an almost outright positive phenomenon. So there we go. This is an examples of how alive and how shifting and how grey and how unfinished the collective imaginary is, where each organization, each nation, each different place, the circus is viewed in a very different way in Norway, for instance, than it is in Russia. I was speaking to a friend when I did that gig in Denmark the other day, and the respect that circus performers has in Russia is totally nothing like what it is here. Here it's still a bizarre offshoot, but we as Showfolk can go back into our own past, and imagined or otherwise, and we can dig things out and reimagine ourselves, and we can spread that like artists have done for us, as we mentioned. Well, now I'll finish up today's episode, and with this we're almost at the end of the mythopoetic exploration, and I'm just gonna finish with a few thoughts on realization, because the word realizing can be understood and used in two ways, both as becoming fully aware of something as a fact, like in I realized what you were saying when you told me to get out of here or whatever, but it can also mean the actualization of something, or to make something real. So this is then, of course, because we're coming to an end of this exploration here, we talked about how the tarot could kind of be an access point, or a portal, a doorway, a cellar door into this place. And by us talking about these things and bringing them up, or even having them just as a subtext in some of the things we talk about, taking ourselves a little more seriously and standing on a little more solid ground, we can all play the role as advocates of new aspects of the social imaginary, or the collective imaginary. And this, by talking about it and by showing it and by doing it and by presenting it, we are realizing it. As we realize it, as we understand it, we can realize it, as in making it happen. And here, this goes to my childhood fascination and obsession with Sherlock Holmes. I do in general love everything that goes on in the period 1840 to 1940. I find this as being a focal point of what where my area of interest is. And so, point in case, Sherlock Holmes is in a sense real. He's not a real person in the world, but as an entity, he still triggers real events. And one interesting intersection of realization, using that word in both ways, is that since the 1930s, Sherlock Holmes has been receiving mail. People have been sending him mail from all over the world, and the mail then ended up at Abbey National Bank, which is located at Sherlock Holmes's address at 220 Baker Street, which is the closest real address, as Holmes lived in 221B, but that isn't actually a real, and that doesn't actually exist on Baker Street. So the mail went to the bank, and there was enough mail arriving for the imaginary detective that the bank, and this is what's nice, the bank, instead of throwing the mail away, employed someone to respond to the mail as Sherlock Holmes's secretary. And this tradition remained in practice until the year 2000. So it went on for like almost 70 years. And the reason it stopped was because the bank moved to a different address. And I guess they didn't set up anything to get the mail sent to them after that. Conan Doyle, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who is the author of and creator of Sherlock Holmes, is also a very interesting character from the point of view of realization and about the dichotomy of what's real or not, because he created this supremely rational detective, which was a logical machine almost, but he also had some very strong beliefs. He believed in theories, and he believed in the manifestations of apparitions and spirits by spiritualists of the time, which made him have a falling out with Harry Houdini, I think I remember now. Conan Doyle's creation of Sherlock Holmes was in itself something unreal materializing. The detective became so real to people that he transcended completely into our world to the point of getting real mail and manifesting a secretary. Holmes is not real like you or I, but on a similar plane certainly to other fictional characters like Indiana Jones and Lara Croft, and perhaps also like some of the great figures of the past, like Harry Houdini and Joan of Arc, people who are still wrapped in mystery and still so ripe for mythopoetic creation. The line of history and legend blurs easily, but it's all out there as parts of our collective imaginary. And the reason I mention Holmes and the bank employing a secretary for him is because it shows how the invented can in a very real sense intersect and materialize into real tangible actions and events in the real world. The mythology of Sherlock Holmes's it affects creators and thinkers and doers in the world today. The imagined can in turn shape reality. Whether something is strictly real or not does not impinge on its ability to create real change in the world. They are not the same, but neither are they completely separate. They are connected through all sorts of networks and translations and spooky action at a distance, as physicists might express it. What starts out as a game and a feat of imagination can become real through the impact it can have on humans, who then can enact the ideas in the world. What starts as an act, as a bit in a show, or as a theme of a monologue, can end up becoming a real thing, a real force of change in the world. A carnival of dreams is the fertile soil for 1,000 stories and myths and legends. I have this verbose multi-episode ramble attempted to create a foundation for further creation, a lowly dirt, a fertile soil for seeds of dreams to grow from. It's up to all of us to realize it. Realize it. If we use it in our creation, if we think of the Mythopoetic Carnival as our own past, as our own myths, or as our own circus, and we Carney and Showfolk and collective imaginary, if we can pull from this, we stand on as firm ground as any human venture. Gone is the flimsy plastic foundations of mere entertainment. We can stand strong against the belittling tone of the perennial questions. What is your real job? And we can answer with great confidence. I am a showman. First and foremost, it's a showman I am. I believe there's great depth and potential in showmanship as a way of life, what we've been exploring here. And what we do is valuable, important, and it can be a powerful tool to make the world a better place. And with this whole project, I want to bring integrity and real connection to the world from our stages and street pitches. And if you're along with me on this, if you're coming along the way with me, then I'd like this week for you to send a personal message to one of your friends. Send a personal message telling them about this podcast. I am confident they will be happy to hear from you and to hear about this and to join us along the way. And with that, all that's left to be said is take care of yourself, those you love, and I hope to see you all along the way.